and I am a photographer, among other things. And Ben was involved with Kathy doing the story on Gus. Gus is Kathy is Gus's granddaughter, and Gus was a cartographer, and my son Ben is a cartographer, as you learn, and I'm a photographer, and Gus was a photographer. So they pulled me in to kind of go and find some of the photography he did back in the 1960s and try to reshoot it today, 50 years later, and then also to shoot around the areas. And so I got kind of pulled in from that angle, and it's been a pleasure working with my son and with Kathy and getting to know Gus because he was a fascinating man.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that we can help even more people at least start to get to know him and push them in the direction of the blog to really let them understand. Catherine, I'll look to you if I could just get the saying and spelling.
Sure. So I'm Catherine. It's Catherine, Phillips, Phillips, Jewett, Jewitt. And Gus was my grandfather, so that's my relationship with him. I grew up in Presque Isle, so northern Maine, and my dad was Gus's son, and we would go visit my grandparents in all seasons. And so I've always wanted to kind of unearth all the information I can find about Gus's life and his art. And so that's the process that we're on. And there are just lots of stories to tell.
Well, I'm excited to get to hear some of them. Ben, I'll go to you with the same question.
Great. Excuse me. My name's Ben Meader. That's Ben and then Meader. And I'm trying to think of the best way to quickly. Kathy was my high school homeroom advisor and English teacher. And so I think it was 2015 or 20, it was a while ago at this point.
Yes.
2015, 2016, that Kathy reached out to me because she saw that I was a cartographer. And we hadn't talked for a few years, but then we got together and she, at the local library, spread out all of his maps that she had all over the table. And I kind of I was hooked. I couldn't help myself. I love old maps, and obviously I'm a digital cartographer and a GIS analyst. And so most of my work is kind of more data science oriented. And the design I do is all digital. It's all in Illustrator and Photoshop and things like that. And so to see these beautiful hand rendered maps where it's all just him with a pencil, paper, pen, and paint and that kind of thing. So Kathy and I kind of started down this trip together, and she led me through all these different avenues of exploring him. And we ended up partnering with the Penobscot Marine Museum to catalog a lot of his artwork, many of which are maps, and some of them are postcards and paintings and woodwork and a whole bunch of cool stuff. So yeah, I kind of just been following Kathy's lead most of the time, and we started the blog because we needed some place to put all this information in. And because of his photographs, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sure, Dad, wouldn't it be fun to go recreate some of these? And he's jumped right into the driver's seat with a lot of it too. So it's nice to see that happen. But yeah.
No, that was perfect. I think what I love so much about all of this is it's become a family project from when it started with Gus and Luther, and has continued to still focus on family. Catherine, I'll start with you. Just start to tell me a little bit about what you know from your grandfather's work, and along with him and his brother.
So I knew growing up that he was often in his workshop, which was out behind his house in Northeast Harbor, Astigu more specifically. And he was a cabinet maker. And so for a while, he was actually working on some gates and things for Thuya Garden, which is in Northeast Harbor. And over the years, I just became more and more interested. We had Phillips maps in our house, and so I knew he was a cartographer. I knew about the postcards. I wasn't as excited about them. So it's kind of ironic that that's now, a big focus of what we're doing. But it's also, I don't know, his work just resonates with me. It always has. And then I discovered his paintings. I didn't realize he had so many paintings. So I guess there are all aspects of his work that fascinate me. Does that answer what you were asking me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're fascinating to anyone who looks at it. And Catherine, I'll stick with you for this next question as well.
Okay.
Since you were the one who had reached out to me, talk about the moment that you realized there's someone on TV that has one of my grandfather's maps behind him.
So my aunt contacted me, and she lives in Ellsworth, and she called me and said, do you realize that there's one of your grandfather's maps is on the wall behind the person who's talking about, I think it's Project Heat, or it was some segment. And I said, no. And she said, wow. And that is actually, I believe, a postcard that he did that has been enlarged. So I decided to contact you because I thought it was wonderful to see that. I've never seen the postcard enlarged to that size, and it was just really exciting. So it was a wonderful moment because I also looked up the segment and saw you with the map behind you. I think Gus's work is in a lot of places, but people don't really know his story or who he is.
Absolutely. So Ben, you have been a part of this journey and learning about Gus over the past few years. Talk about some of the big takeaways that you've had after first having his granddaughter as a homeroom teacher to then analyzing the history behind him.
I think I have a hard time being concise, but I'll try. I think the biggest thing I've learned about or learned from Gus, I think, is his personal story seems perhaps like this novelty thing from years gone by, but it's actually quite similar to my own life in different settings, right? Like, just the first thing I'll say that I learned from Gus is, so when he started, his brother was, quite a bit older, more of a draftsman, more kind of analytical minded, and so a lot of Luther's maps look kind of more precise or something, and they look a little bit more like, okay, well, this goes there, and everything is all more manicured. Gus's early maps, so Luther showed Gus how to kind of do some of that map making process from the beginning, and so Gus's early maps kind of seems like he's trying to follow what his brother told him to do. And his brother died, kind of, and it was tragic for him because he had to take over the whole business in 1960, I think it was. Kathy, you can correct me there.
Yes,
but in 1960, his brother died, so he took over the map and postcard business. But then, as the years went by, Gus's maps just became a lot more artistic. Where he would just render something all in paint, or he would draw little animals and creatures all over it. And so I think, like, what I've learned from that is that it's Gus's creativity that shows through all of his work that draws people in. And I think, as a more analytically minded person myself, I've learned from him that it's the creative parts of yourself that really, that's really what people want to see a lot of the time. And so anyway, I think, like, seeing Gus and how his whole life was this patchwork of jobs. Sometimes he was a farmer, sometimes he was doing cutting ice, sometimes he was he was a woodworker, he was a cartographer, he ended up being a draftsman during World War II as well. So but his whole life is not like, he's not he never thought of himself as famous. He just kind of, like, could not help himself but create art. And I think that's just a really admirable thing, that he made his life happen as best he could. It wasn't perfect. And I'm new to this kind of historical, genealogical kind of research, but from what I've done, you just see that everybody's lives are so complex, and they're tragic, and they're funny, and they're heartwarming in various degrees. And I mean, there's endless stories we could tell you about Gus that just, like, make you go, oh, like one time his entire map, what was it? His map house burned to the ground, right? Like thousands of maps. And you just think, what would that feel like to this guy, So my process, and I think with Kathy too, Kathy, at least to me, has been one of the most important mentor figures. Sorry, Dad. I mean, Dad too, obviously, but Kathy, really taught me how to write in high school. But even after that, when we've been writing together for this blog and other proposals and things we put together, she continues to make me more, okay, well, Ben, what are you trying to say here? And like really making me think about how I can become a better writer and a better storyteller and that kind of thing. So it's overall just been an amazing process. Very exhausting at times, but very, very fun too. So.
Now, John, you get to look at a different angle with all of this, looking specifically at those photos and those postcards. Tell me about your experience traveling to some of these different parts of Maine and trying to recreate these photos. I've looked at them and they're absolutely stunning. You must feel like you're walking back in time almost when you're doing these.
Oh, yeah, it's great fun. I mean, it's when Ben contacted me. I've been involved with this for about a year now, and I was fascinated with it because I've got a background in. When I was a student, I worked with Sandy Ives at the University of Maine. I did oral history stuff and did a biography that was published there, and so I liked the family history thing. So I did that for my grandfather. But then I'm a photographer as well, and to go to these spots, I travel around the state. Just a little background story. I run a portable planetarium, and I travel to elementary and middle schools all over the state and teach astronomy. So I travel the state anyway. And I'm a photographer. So my camera's like on my hand when I'm not teaching all the time. So I've been to a lot of these places before, around, and I can go through my catalog of thousands of pictures and find things that are close to what Gus did. But now I go to those spots with Gus in mind. And like Kathy and I went to Popham. We did one of the ones on Popham Beach. And when I finally found the spot where Gus took the picture, I stood there and just chills went up and down my spine. It was like, this is where he stood. The picture's not the same today because trees have grown up and I couldn't really get the same shot he did. But by looking at the angles of where telephone poles were and the walk was and the fort was, I knew I was like within inches of where he was standing 50 years ago to take the same shot. And there's something just very chilling about that and very marvelous, great connection thing. I really connect with Gus because he was a Mainer through and through in the way I understood it growing up, that you do what you have to do. And if you can do postcards through the summer and you take these pictures and you tote them around and you sell them and you make some money, and then you have to teach for a little while or you have to do this for a little while, and you become this jack of all trades sort of thing. And I grew up with a grandfather who did that and two grandfathers who did that. And I sort of do that myself. I make a little money with photography. I work with astronomy. I've got my hands in all kinds of different artistic things. And so I really identify with Gus in many ways. We're definitely kindred spirits. And when I get to a spot where I know he was, and I feel like he just is right there standing beside me smiling, and it makes it all worth it.
And Kathy, as you have gone through this journey of looking at all of these old postcards and maps and reading about your family's history, do you feel like you're even closer to your grandfather than maybe you were when you knew him in your own childhood?
In some ways, definitely. Yes, because I know more about how difficult life was for him at times. He had 5 children. And so, I mean, he was feeding his family, he was supporting his family. Growing up, I had a wonderful relationship with him. He's the one that told us stories to put us to sleep at night, and he made us stilts. And we would, go down the driveway in stilts. So I felt very close to him then. But yes, in learning more about his life, I'm kind of in awe of how he was able to take so many photographs, to do what he did. I don't know how he made the time or had the time to do it all.
And is that something that you notice too, Ben, when you see all the different aspects that he was working in, or are you just at times amazed that everything was actually able to be there and you're still able to catalog it now?
Yeah, I mean, I think in in some ways, at least from a database, because a lot of this project I've mostly been, the organization guy, trying to keep track of everything, and doing scans and kind of transcribing and that kind of thing. What's most amazing to me is that he drove around in his car, his station wagon that was like loaded with this stuff, and just sold stuff to convenience stores, right? It wasn't at this time there were other people selling kind of postcards and pictorial maps and things like that, but they were usually part of a larger publishing company that had distribution and that kind of thing. And so Gus was a guy with a station wagon who made some stuff, and he went around and sold it. And not only is that crazy in and of itself, but it's still around, right? Even with the fire at his map making studio, and even all this stuff, you see his maps because people like them. And so to me, yeah, what you were saying, I mean, it is kind of crazy and cool that he was able to juggle all this throughout his life in different waves. He did a lot of painting in one section of his life, and he did a lot of maps in another section, and postcard and things like that. But what's most amazing to me is that it's all decentralized and scattered, and it's kind of like, oh, there's one. Oh, there's one. And Kathy and I worked on this for like 3-4 years, and then just last year we saw 2 maps that we had never even seen before. Like that, why haven't we seen that one? Where did that come from? So it's cool, because it does feel like a little bit like it's not a treasure hunt. Sounds maybe a little cheap, but it's an adventure for sure. So.
Now, I will pose this question to John now. Talk with me a little bit about your hopes for the blog and plans to continue photographing. What's going to be the future like for the 3 of you, remembering the life of Gus?
Well, right now we have the next 3 blogs planned. We're currently working on one on Eggemogan Reach and the Deer Isle Sedgwick Bridge, that area. So right now we're continuing with that. It may turn into something bigger eventually. I mean, we have distant hopes of having a book published or something, perhaps. But right now we're just trying to get some entries under our belt, so we have that as a to fall back on. That this is the body of work we're working with, giving people examples of Gus's incredible story, and seeing where it takes us, I think.